If the staff will provide a summary, we'll get started.
Vice Chair Linthicum, members of the committee, House Bill 3029 exempts children from attending full-time public school for 1 year if their parent or legal guardian notifies the school district they will delay such enrollment to meet the child's needs for cognitive, social, or physical development. The bill allows a determination to be made by the parent or legal guardian. Takes effect July 1st, 2017.
Okay, Representative.
Thank you, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Cedric Hayden, State Representative for House District 7. You have a bill brought to you with bipartisan support, unanimous out of the House Education Committee and unanimous on the floor. The intent of this bill is fairly simple. Currently, the mandatory school age is 6 years old to start school. On OLS meeting materials, you will find some information that I've put together that it might be appropriate to have an exemption to that in certain very, very limited cases. I've worked extensively with the Oregon Education Board and the Oregon Education Association to come up with what in the House was a consensus agreement on language to make that work. One of the meeting materials talks about the phenomenon of birth age, and what I used was a sports analogy of baseball in Little League. We went back and did some research on that, and this is not scientific research. It was an opinion piece with some data that was pulled from Major League Baseball, and they determined that, going back to 1965, that Major League Baseball players, 12.2% of those players had a birth date of August, and 6.4 of those players had a birth date of July. And so they took a look at Little League. Why would that be? And the theory is that the child that had an additional 12 months to develop with their peer group would end up being more successful long term because they were able to develop. And because of that, Little League actually in 1996 changed the date of the time that you enter back to April to kind of offset that. This plays out in other sports. If we apply that to our education system and take a look, I used, again, in the meeting materials, Portland Public Schools has a talented and gifted program which you have a age of 5-year-olds, 5 to 6 years now to enter kindergarten. But if your child is talented and gifted, you are able to apply for having your child enter with their peer group ahead of time, meaning when they're 4 years old and some months. Out of the whole educational system, I wasn't able to find data on all the school districts, but I was able to track down 19 reports of students having to do that or taking advantage of that program. When it comes to children with disabilities, sometimes or most of the time they are much smaller, they weigh a little bit less, and they're not able to achieve the cognitive abilities through the school screening process to get to the 110% or the 100% that the school would like to see them. Some of these students are at a lower level due to developmental disabilities, and so the intent of this bill is to give the option to have 1 more year to let them grow a little bit, to get a little bit older, so that they can simply fit in with their peer group. The original bill was amended. It's an amendment bill that makes sure that this is an extremely narrow exemption that would be allowed. I think probably the 19 talented and gifted students that we were able to find that have taken advantage of the early enrollment is probably about the same number of students. If you go back before the requirement of the age of 6, there was 86 children that didn't enter school age when they could have entered at 7 years of age when we had that requirement. And so your pool of possibilities is 86, and of those I was unable to determine from the Department of Education how many of those would be special needs. But having worked professionally in this a special needs provider for 23 years in the dental field. I know that families worry a lot about, was my child born in August or was my child born in July? And if my child was born just after the cutoff, there's a breath of relief. I don't have a study to show that. I just know that from working with so many families with children with disabilities. And if their child was born just before, so they turn that age just before, there's always a, how are we going to make this? My child isn't potty trained yet. My child isn't able to do the cognitive abilities. Am I going to have to worry about taking diapers to school and things like that? And so it's a burden on the parents. I will submit to you, very few parents are not excited when their child is of school age and ready to go to school. Again, there was only 86 children that didn't enter when they could have throughout the whole state not entered school. But there's a small number of those families that would like the opportunity to delay by 12 months for a very narrow scope of cognitive and physical disabilities so that they can meet with their peer group. My bipartisan support on this bill, I'd like to have Representative Solomon come and also introduce the reason why she joined me on this bill.
Thank you, Chair Roblin, members of the Senate Education Committee. My name is Janine Solomon, for the record. I am a state representative for House District 30, which is Banks, North Plains, Hillsborough, and Beaverton. House Bill 3029 is a very important bill. I heard the testimony on this bill in the House Education Committee, and I felt compelled to sign on as a sponsor. This bill is important for kids and also important to the parents to make sure that the overall well-being of their child is taken care of. Kids with special needs deserve to have this exception so they are able to better fit in with their peers. I know as a parent, all I want for my kids is for them to succeed and have a fair shot at life. This bill allows for kids who need more time to take more than 1 year so that they are set up for the best possible scenarios to succeed. I thank the great representative from Lane and Douglas County for bringing this forward. And I hope that you'll be joining me in supporting this legislation as a parent and a parent of a special education teacher who understands the need for this legislation. Thank you.
Any questions? Yes, Senator Hass.
Thank you, Representative Hayden. Thank you for bringing this bill forward. The law that lowered the age to 6 just went into effect last year, right?
That's correct.
So I'm just, I know what you said, but were there problems? Were there cases where, you know, we hit the rocks or something? Are there cases that are there problems, I guess, that we're trying to correct?
Well, I know there are parents that have this concern. I don't have a case study for you, but this is a concern within the individual education community that they worry about having to feel like, the parents feel like they have to push their child ahead a little bit, where they think that if they could be more mixed with their peer group by delaying 1 year, it would be advantageous to the child. The overall system to the state school system would not be any more in individual education programs. The federal government provides 0 to 21 years of age. The state does put some parameters around the 0 to 3 and 4 to 5, and then on 5 K through 12 on up to 21. So we're not trying to change any of that. We're just saying that we want these parents of a small number of children. Again, I'm guessing that it may be 10 or 12 families in Oregon that would take advantage of that and go through that process.
Any other yes, Senator Gelser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've talked about this before. I just wanted to make sure that it was on the record. This could not be used by a school district to tell a child that they were not prepared to enter kindergarten at age 6.
That is correct. Thank you for the question, Senator Gelser. We were very specific in the language of this bill. That is the parent's choice. know because I have experienced this personally. The difficulties with several IEPs in my own family. And this bill will not allow the school districts to say you have to wait. This bill only allows the choice to the parents if they choose to.
And a follow-up?
Please.
Thank you. And that is not a decision that would be within the power of the IEP. This is not an IEP team decision. This is
Not
only a parental decision.
correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So my only question is, I also have a need to protect the child. So from my perspective, I look at this and say, there are other services that can be provided to kids with special needs outside of the K-12 system. And sometimes parents want to protect their child so much they don't let them into any of those things either. So they just delay everything for another year to hold on to their child. And sometimes that's not in the best interest of the child. I don't know how we figure that out to make sure that, because most of us, I think, now have come to the conclusion that it is much better to help families and others get this help they need to allow that child to get the best potential, because the greatest time of that elasticity of the brain is when they're young, regardless of whether they're special needs children or regular children. That's the time to invest the most in those kids. How do we make sure that that kind of thing happens? I just have this feeling in me as this principal that I always wanted to make sure that everything I could possibly get for those kids to make it better for them later on is important.
So thank you for the question, Chair Roblin. And yes, that is a significant concern. Again, having spent a lot of time in my professional career with these families, it would be extremely unusual for those families to try and avoid having help through special education. In my experience, those families are always clamoring to get more help. In our current existing law, which is not changed by this, in my opinion, and the relating to clause of this bill doesn't let me fix it, but maybe in the future I can, there is a disconnect between the state's set of 4 to 5 years old with early childhood education, particularly with special needs, that the state's decision, not the federal decision, the federal funds go through 0 through 21. Our state does disconnect those children, and then at 6 years old, they're required to go into K through 12. So there's already an existing gap there that I think you're referring to, that I don't support that gap. That's not what we're trying to change. I would love to close that gap. My opinion of closing that gap would to be give an exemption to let them stay in the early childhood longer, which is allowed under the federal regulation.
Because 6 years old was a compromise. There were some of us who really felt it should be younger. So I agree with you on trying to figure out how to close that. So
I believe that is a very important but separate conversation.
Okay. Any other questions from our committee? And I see no one else for this bill, so thank you very much for being here. And
Thank you.
We're going to close our public hearing on House Bill 3029.